So yeah, while we're just working on getting the slides to work, this is, I think, a super important topic that's pretty poorly understood. And a, a high-functioning board, like a dysfunctional board, is really like a zebra. It's very, very difficult to describe, but super easy to spot. So the next slide will be a picture of a zebra. And I'm sure it'll come up in a sec. I think we're just rebooting the system. Perfect, there it is. So high-functioning boards like a zebra, or poorly functioning boards like a zebra, super, super difficult to describe, but very easy to spot. We will have all experienced a poorly functioning board, I'm sure, whether you're a founder, you're an investor, you're an operator that joins board meetings. You'll be familiar with some of these signs. I think the biggest red flag, the clearest sign that your board is poorly functioning, is probably the one on the bottom left of the screen. So founder leaves a meeting drained, right? If you leave a board meeting and your initial reaction is, ugh, just one of total exhaustion and relieved that you don't need to think about board meetings for another quarter, your board probably isn't very high functioning. Now, our industry loves conventional wisdoms, right? VCs, other founders pass them out all the time. And here's some conventional wisdoms around what to do to create a high-functioning board. And there's a lot of advice there that's good advice. It makes total sense, generally, to bring in a chairman after your Series B or Series C to really get the investor directors to sing from the same term sheet. Makes total sense. It's also generally a good idea to send board packs out in advance, right? Because it allows directors to arrive at board meetings prepared and able to really focus on the key issues that the founder wants them to focus on, the 2-3 key strategic issues. So this is all good advice, but it's not actually what produces a high-functioning board. What produces a high-functioning board is the culture that the founder creates. So it's the founder creating a culture of transparency, accountability, frankness, and mutual respect. So the rest of the session will really split into 2 parts. So first, we'll cover 6 tips for founders to create this sort of culture. And then we'll focus on 6 tips to apply operational adjustments to really enhance, amplify this culture. So with that being said, let's focus on the 6 tips to create the right sort of culture. Tip 1, build trust. Be vulnerable with your investors. Be clear with them about what's going well, what isn't, where you need help, right? Transparency creates trust, and trust is a good thing. This is also the best way to prevent back channels from developing among your investors, right? So tip 1, build trust. Tip 2, demand preparedness. So really ensure that your board arrives fully informed and ready to engage. Make it clear that it's not okay to read the pre-reading on the taxi ride in or squeeze it in between Zoom meetings. That's not okay. You expect everyone to really digest the pre-reading that you send out. And the more work you put into your pre-reading, the more you'll get out. So really create a culture of, hey, I want everyone to be fully prepared for us to engage on the 2-3 critical issues facing our company. So tip 2, demand preparedness. Tip 3, a close cousin to tip 2, put your board to work, right? Before and after board meetings, assign really specific tasks to specific directors. The more specific, the better. So actually, on that point, we had a founder in our portfolio who used to, before or at the beginning of board meetings, give out points to investors based on how helpful they've been in the run-up to the board meeting, right? So like Harry Potter, Hogwarts style, if the platform team made an introduction or facilitated the hiring of a VP of engineering, then the founder would shout that out and say 10 points to investor X. So it was a real good way to channel that competitive tension that investors have into real value for the company, and it would create this culture of accountability. So tip 3, put your board to work. Tip 4, encourage dissent. So avoid groupthink, right? No subject should be taboo. Everyone should really be pushed to give their opinions. Tip 5, embrace diversity. So the more diverse the perspectives of your board members, the better or easier it will be to become encouraging that dissent, and that dissent that produces kind of this real marketplace of ideas. So an article by Sifted last year said that 45% of European boards don't have a single woman. That's going to change. That has to change. But I'm not just talking about diversity in terms of gender or race. I'm also talking about diversity in terms of experience, right? Different product experience. Someone might have experience in having exited a few companies before it as a non-exec or as a founder, right? That could be helpful when you're trying to dual track a listing and a sale. Maybe you're a regulated business, in which case it's super helpful to have someone who's familiar with regulatory frameworks. So that diversity of experience is super, super important. And then the last point, manage egos. It's not going to be surprising to anyone, or I'm sure you all know, that investors have pretty big egos. So it's super important to create a low ego culture. I think the same applies to startups. Really creating a culture of inquiry, becoming before advocacy, I think is super important. So manage egos, a low ego culture is, I think, a real key ingredient to a high-functioning board. So these are the 6 tips to create the right sort of environment, the right culture. Let's focus on those operational improvements. So again, we'll have 6, starting with the, I think, most important one, and this is unfortunately far too rarely done. Use each fundraising as an opportunity to evaluate your board and also enhance it, right? Just like your company will go through life cycles and will change through its life cycle, right, from incorporation to exit, your board should also evolve. Like what we all see far too often is a funding round happens, the board is just pasted forward with the new investor added, maybe the earliest investor coming off. There's an opportunity that's lost there. There's an opportunity to use the new money that's coming in as part of the fundraising as an opportunity to really evaluate the board. Is this thing still fit for purpose? Do we have any skills gaps that we need to fill? So new round equals new board, super important to do. And the kind of term sheet stage is the right time to do this, not when you've already onboarded the investor and the documents are with the lawyers for papering, right? Do it right at the beginning. It's a key term of the term sheet. So that's tip 1. Tip 2, pre-reading. We've covered this. It's super useful to send the board pack out in advance. So one of our portfolio companies does something super cool here. The founder, when sending out the board pack, includes a Loom voiceover that summarizes the business update so that she doesn't need to cover it during the board meeting, and also identifies the 2-3 key strategic issues she wants the meeting to focus on. So there's like a physical pack, a PDF, and then there's that Loom video that kind of makes the whole thing a bit more engaging. Tip 3, closing summary. So post-meeting, I think it's super important to send out a summary of what you guys have agreed on. It's a good way to get everyone on the same page. People may have had different opinions, but you've come up with a clear set of actionable items that you all agree on, and let's memorialize that. Everyone's eyes should be wide open to the risks, so it's a good way, a post-closing summary, to get everyone on the same page. Tip 4, power in numbers. It's really useful to diversify your touch points across your investors, right? Diversify them across the deal team that you're working with. Diversify them by engaging with the platform team. The more people that emotionally buy into your startup success, the more people feel emotional about wanting to help you achieve that success, the better. And this will also help when your key investor contact leaves their fund, right? Because then you're suddenly not in a position of, well, who can I engage with at the investor? Then the fifth point, streamline attendance. This is one of my favorite ones. Generally speaking, small teams are good, even though that's one of the conventional wisdoms we covered. I think it's conventional wisdom for a reason. I'd really try to limit the number of people in the room, including the number of observers. Just because someone doesn't have a formal observer right doesn't mean you can't invite them to attend board meetings, right? But there's a lot of value in limiting the observer rights you give out, because if you haven't given any observer rights to anyone, formal ones, the next investor can't ask for them. And you just reduce the likelihood that after your Series D, you have 15 people in the room, 7 of whom are observers, and they're not really adding any value. They have no skin in the game, right, because they're not directors, but they have a lot of influence and they kind of crowd out the message. So streamlining attendance, I think, super important. One of the things I didn't put on there, but probably should have, is evaluate the board, right? Every year, the board should get together and self-evaluate itself. You know, you can use, for example, candid one-on-one interviews led by the independent director or the chairman if you have one, to really figure out, hey, do we all agree that we're working the right sort of way? And then the final point, beyond the boardroom. So I'd really try to create a strong team here. And you're not going to create a strong team if you only see each other every 4 months, right? You really want to maybe have a pre-board dinner, maybe create a Slack channel for the board or a WhatsApp group. And at the seed stage, this tends to happen, right? Like the guys who raise their hands, your investors, I'm sure you have a WhatsApp group, I'm sure you have a Slack group. But like as the board evolves and you're at the Series B, C stage, and you have kind of a proper board, maybe a chairman, it's important to kind of keep that kind of young team dynamic going. So final operational improvement tip, a way to really enhance and amplify your culture is make sure that the investors and the board in general spend a lot of time with each other. So before we get to questions, I just wanted to summarize the key takeaways. One, there is no one-size-fits-all solution to how to create a high-functioning board, right? A small board might be good, but a small board might not be helpful if you have a strategic investor on the board who you're trying to crowd out by increasing the size of the board and surrounding that strategic investor with a bunch of kind of financial investors. So there's no one-size-fits-all solution to creating a high-functioning board. But generally, what makes great boards great is a great culture. Because like any team, a board is a dynamic social system. Operational improvements, they can really help amplify your culture. But without the right culture, these operational improvements will be totally toothless. So I think you really want to find some investors who will be able to stress test these ideas with you, really build the right board, help you maintain the right sort of culture, because ultimately, culture is what really, really matters. So that's all I had. Happy to answer any questions. Awesome. Also after the session, by the way, right? You guys can just grab me. Very happy to continue the discussion on a one-on-one basis. So just let me know.
Some time for some questions. I'll start with the third one. Apart from yourself, who else should people follow on LinkedIn or Twitter or Substack to understand and like to have good examples of how to build those boards?
So there are a lot of people. I'd probably shout
Start with Tom.
I'd probably shout out a guide to boards that Balderton created. So Balderton is another multi-stage fund, and they produced a really good kind of summary for founders of how to, and this is really focused on some of the operational improvements that kind of we listed out, but on how to create the right sort of board, when to, for example, create subcommittees, right? Should you create a REMCO at your seed stage? Probably not.
What is REMCO?
A remuneration committee. Yeah, what is exactly. So it's kind of a 101 guide for founders to boards, which I think is super useful. So Laura McGinnis created it, and it's super useful. So I checked that out.
And one more. So you said that at each new investment round is a good opportunity for a founder to reassess the board and understand whether it has the right superpowers to make it succeed. As a founder, should I be thinking about prioritizing board members or sort of, investors or, investor team members who are right there to support me on my current challenges? Or should the board be somebody who's, perhaps walked the walk, knows how the picture may unfold 5 years down the line, and can, keep the big vision thinking? How do you think about prioritizing that?
That's a really good question. I mean, the easy answer is you want to mix, right? Because you'll need to be firefighting.
Sure.
But you also want to have the long-term kind of strategy and goal, and you want, more importantly, for everyone to be, or just as importantly, for everyone to be aligned behind that goal.
Yeah.
I'd say that the problem on a lot of boards is that they're just not very diverse in terms of experience. So a lot of boards will just be the same sort of VCs, right? Similar age, similar background, similar focus, similar incentives.
Right.
Right? And often that incentive is just, how can we make the next financing a successful one? There's not enough focus of, hey, what's the long-term outcome we want to achieve? How can we facilitate that? So I think that's probably one of the biggest issues on kind of in terms of boards in general.
Cool. Awesome.
Is prioritizing the short-term fundraising over the long-term success.
Nice. And I want to squeeze in just one sentence summary. You speak a lot about how founders can engage boards.
Yeah.
What about employees? The bigger the company gets, the harder it may be for employees to understand what is the role of board, what's being discussed. It's also quite sensitive. What's one thing that founders can do to engage employees in the process?
I think that's a great question. I think what works really well at in board meetings is to actually bring in the C-level suite to the first half of the board meeting so that they themselves can give kind of the lay of the land from their perspective. So it's good because the investors then see, okay, here's the chief people officer's view on morale in the company. Here's the head of sales view on kind of how we're tracking against the business plan. So it's good for the investor because they kind of get the truth from the horse of the mouth, or mouth of the horse. But it's also good for the C-level because they feel more engaged and they kind of feel part of that core team.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for indulging us. Cool. Well, Tom McGinn, everybody.
Cool. Thank you very much, guys. Thanks.